Andrew Klavan, always love getting to chat with you. The book Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. Man, this is quite the title. Why did you write this?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that I'm always asked, I mean, I'm a crime writer and I always get this letter, you call yourself a Christian and you write about all these horrible things and these horrible people and they say horrible things. And so in part, I think I was just trying to explain that I think that that's an important thing to do. I think that it is actually a good thing to write about the evil that men do because there's so much of it. And that's where the stories are. And conversely, I don't like this absolutely squeaky clean Christian storytelling that has come to pass in the last, century, quarter century or so. When I look at the great works of Christian art, they're very dark. When you look at the great paintings, there's a lot of the martyrdom, a lot of crucifixion scenes, a lot of the reality of life and the harshness of life. And I just think that this idea that, everybody keeps quoting, I guess, Philippians, meditate on what is true and what is noble and all this. Well, to start out with what is true is very dark. I mean, when you're dealing with this world, as the Gospels tell us, it's a very dark world. And so if your faith is based on this kind of happy talk idea that nothing bad happens or that everything is going to turn out all right because you have faith, I think you're going to lose your faith pretty quickly when you confront the reality of life. So this is a story. This is a book about 3 real life murders and how they were turned into art and what I glean from that art that really actually helps me not only with my faith, but with my joy in a dark world.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at scripture, it also says Ephesians 6, we're in the middle of a spiritual battle, that there's a battle between good and evil, and that it's actually not a flesh and blood battle. It's, so the things that carry over, murders and chaos and death, all of these things, they're part of this broader battle that is going on that we don't necessarily see, but we see the effect of it. When you think of darkness and evil, what do you think the benefit of being able to see that and maybe have it point back to the need for goodness is? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is, I start out with the premise, the kind of simple premise that murder is evil. And one of the reasons murder is evil is because the human being is such a beautiful thing. This entire internal world of creativity, and I mean this not just of artists. I mean, of every single person who lives creates a world inside himself that is unique and gives him a unique path to God that no one else has ever had before, no one else will ever have again. And that's what makes evil such a horrific act. I mean, if we were just meat, it wouldn't matter. It would just be like, killing a chicken or something like that. It's really important that people be treated as if they were sacred. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is this, and I think this is really the important thesis of the book. A work of art is not the same as the subject of a work of art. A work of art about murder is not obviously the same as murder. So if you take, for instance, a story like Macbeth, which is full of darkness and murder and betrayal and dishonesty and corruption, at the end of that play, you come away and think that play was beautiful. That was a beautiful play. And the idea that an artist can take the evil in the world and turn it into a work of beauty hints to me at something that God can do with the darkness of this world. And whenever anybody says, I don't understand how there can be an all-knowing, all-loving, all-good God and so much evil in the world, I always think, well, maybe your mind is not big enough to encompass, or anybody's mind is big enough to encompass the beauty that God is going to make of this world. And I think that's the only answer to that question. I don't think, everything happens for a reason, or, people have gone to a better place, or, everything works out in the end. I don't think those actually answer the question. But I think the idea that we're part of a beautiful design in which sometimes you come into patches of darkness in that design, that to me is something I can imagine. I can't quite grasp it because I'm just a person. But I think that art gives you a hint of how that works. The fact that you can have a sculpture like the Pietà, the dead Jesus lying in his mother's arms, and it can be so beautiful. At the same time, it's so incredibly tragic. It tells me that there is a beauty that can come out of darkness that is more than we can imagine.
What have you learned? I mean, you've been writing on crime for a long time, right?
Right.
What, as you've written novels and covered the topic, how has it changed you? What have you learned about not only people and the human condition, but about God?
Well, I think the first thing, and this is the thing that brought me to God, because I was a crime writer long before I came to
Yeah.
faith. But one of the things that brought me to God was my absolute conviction that the moral order is something real. I mean, it's obviously the human version of something real. We don't know God's idea of it, but we see it through a glass darkly. And this idea that morality is relative, that, oh, if you live in this country, one thing is fine. And if you live in another country, another thing is fine. That may be true on the outskirts of morality, like what kind of dress you wear and what kind of way, customs you have. But no, there are certain things that people do that are evil no matter where they do them, and evil even if everybody on the planet thinks they're good. And that was the only leap of faith I ever took on my journey to God. My journey to faith, the only time I ever said, this is true whether I can prove it or not, is that I know it is better to give a beggar bread than it is to slaughter a child. And as I wrote, since I grew up in this time when moral relativism was becoming the intellectual default, a lot of my early novels are exactly about that. It's people struggling with this idea. How can I know what's real? How can I know whether everything is in my imagination or not? And then one day I wrote a novel called True Crime, which was a very successful book. And at the very opening of the book, the guy basically, he's on death row, and he thinks to himself, I know this is real. Something about this is real. And if you don't think this is real, you're crazy. When I wrote that line, I thought that's the end of that conversation for me. And that was very shortly before I started to become at least a theist, before I started to pray and really change my life. That recognition is, no, I don't care what anybody says. This is the truth, that morality exists. And once you learn that, you can't get away from God. Once you're in that net, you're going to be pulled in.
And you've had, and we'll come back to the book in a moment, but you've had this incredibly successful career. You and I met over a decade ago at the Blaze, and I think back to just all the things you've done from books down the line, your successful, show, your work at Daily Wire now. And I know this is a loaded question, so share as much as you want, but I have loved over the years hearing your journey to God, and I love how you said it. You first became a theist, then you kind of moved into Christianity, but take us through that journey and what it was. And again, I know it's a loaded question, but it's such an important story that sort of knocked you out of that darkness and sort of into the light.
Well, actually, this actually does apply to Kingdom of Cain, because the first thing that started me on that journey was reading Crime and Punishment. I mean, I can pick a lot of different things, but it was always literature, always stories that moved me in this certain direction. And when I read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky at the age of 19, I was in college. They were starting to teach this kind of moral relativity, and words didn't really mean anything. And Dostoevsky was a guy, he was a man of faith, but he was a guy who found a painting of the dead Christ I think it's by Holbein, and it is just as grim and dark and dead a picture of death, of a corpse, as you have ever seen. There's no hope in it. There's no hint of resurrection. And Dostoevsky used to sit in front of that painting for so long that his wife had to come and fetch him away, because he wanted to make sure his faith was realistic, that his faith was not a cartoon. So I read Crime and Punishment, which begins with an axe murder of two women, one of whom is retarded, to use the old word for it, the old accurate word for it. And he kills this poor afflicted woman with an axe. And I was reading this. I'm 19 years old. I'm in university. They're telling me that morality is relative. And I put the book down and I covered my face with my hands. And I just thought, no, there's no planet. There's no planet where that is justifiable. And so that idea that you cannot justify some things, that some things are just evil, started me thinking. And I went through some bad times in my youth. I had real mental problems. I lost 10 years to mental struggle. I came out of that in what I believe to be in a miraculous way. I mean, I went in 2 years, I went from being suicidal to being a joyful human being. And it was only when I became joyful, because when I was suicidal, I thought, well, I can't believe in God, God now. This is how stubborn I am, Billy. I can't believe in God now because that would be a crutch. I'm dying here. God is reaching out to me in a million different ways. I'm thinking, nah, that would be a crutch. So I didn't believe in that. But then when I broke through, and I was suddenly, it was a 180-degree turnaround. Then I started to think, I've already reasoned my way to God. I should probably start to pray. And again, it was a story. I was reading a novel where one of the characters I liked started to pray. And I thought, well, if he can pray, I can pray. And that just transformed everything. At that point, I realized I was not talking to myself. I was getting information was coming in that I couldn't possibly have thought of. And I realized this is it. This is where I'm going. And so it was I was 49 when I was baptized. So it was a long, long journey. And when I've sometimes in anguish, cried out to God, why did you let me wander so long? Because it was so joyful. It was such a joyful coming to faith. And I thought, why did you let me go on for so long? And I think that God just wanted me to go down every possible wrong road, to hit every possible dead end, so that when I would talk to people who were on the edge, I could say, yeah, I've been to the end of that road, and here's what happens, And so it's been a tremendous joy in my life. It's the turning point of my life, no question about it. And just turning my life over to God was like such a relief. And so, yeah, it really has been a journey, and it informs everything that I think and write.
Yeah, so it's obviously changed, and that was going to be my question, which you said there at the end. It's changed the way you live, the way you do your career. It's changed, I would imagine, every facet of your existence.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it has. And it's been, I kind of turned it all over to God. I sort of said at some point, I'm not really very good at this. I think I'm as good a writer as is around. I will brag about my writing forever, but I'm a lousy businessman. I'm lousy at self-promotion. I don't do a good job. And so I just turned it all over and said, you do it. You can have the money. I don't care. Just take it over because it's killing me. And yeah, that turned everything around. And it also just made me relax. I see so many people eating themselves up over every, up and down in a career and everything that goes one way or another. And so many people I remember what it was like to be so hungry. But that hungry gets filled in a better way, I think, yeah, when you have faith. And so, yeah, it has changed everything.
Yeah. When you're working as an author or in media or doing anything in Hollywood, they're all different, but they're similar in that you can get sucked into obsessing over the numbers and the success. And like you were saying, the ebbs and the flows. But when you turn it over to God and you just trust him with it, you stop being consumed by those things, feeling like, I'm on the journey that he wants me on. I'm following the steps he wants me to follow. And that's all I can do, right? I can't obsess over those things and allow them to destroy me or hurt my family even, or hurt my relationship with the people around me, right?
Yeah, it's just degrading. It's degrading. On top of everything else, it's like, I write. I want people to read what I write, and I'm proud of what I write, and I think they'll like what I write. But I can't live and die on, what my ranking is on Amazon or what has happened here. And it's funny, these books, these nonfiction books I've started to write, which have done really well. I wrote them really all for myself. I just wrote them because God was telling me to write them. So I wrote them, and the success they've had has come as a complete surprise. And so, it's very, very moving to me that people read these books that are about literature and Christianity and about art and Christianity. And it changed. They write to me and they say, this really changed me. And that's just an incredible payoff for the work. And so, I feel like sometimes I have to, this is a book. Kingdom of Cain is a book about movies like Psycho and Silence of the Lambs and books like Crime and Punishment and all these books about murder and sometimes even horror. And I feel like I have to sell it to Christians who think like, when you're talking about God, suddenly everything has to be sunshine and roses. But the people who read it are deeply moved by it. And that's just incredibly gratifying.
I mean, look, even when you go through scripture, there are things, I have a 9 and a 12-year-old. There are things that I have to be like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm addressing this appropriately because these are kids and they're not going to understand what is happening in this part of the Bible unless I really can explain it to them in an age appropriate way. I think people forget that about the Bible. They assume it's like every story. They're not easy to read. They're not always easy to understand. They're incredibly powerful and they have everything to teach us. It's God's word, but it's not always clean and tidy and happy, all of the stories in the Bible, right? I mean, they're just not all of them.
I told you I get these letters, and I still get them all the time. You call yourself a Christian, and you write. But one guy said to me, thank you very much. I'm going to stick with the Bible. And I thought, have you read the Bible? Because there are subjects in the Bible I've never dared to touch, because they're so dark. And I think that's the thing. I think the whole world, when I read the Bible, obviously I do every day, but the whole world is in it. And I think that that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to understand that the world in which we have faith is this world. It's not Candyland. It's not Never Never Land.
So, all right, final question for you, because that brings us back here to Kingdom of Cain. When people put this book down, what do you want them feeling and thinking?
I want them feeling and thinking there is some overarching beauty in the world that artists hint at, and I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be afraid to look at things. I don't have to be afraid to experience things. I don't have to be afraid if I'm reading. I know a lot of young guys, especially, they like horror movies. They like shoot 'em up movies and things like that. And if they're Christians, they might feel guilty about it. I don't think you have to do that. Obviously, look, there are things I would never watch because they're ugly in their souls. But a movie or a book written by a true artist is not going to be ugly. It's going to be beautiful at some level. And so I just want people to understand that their faith is not fragile. Their faith is not supposed to make them fragile. It's not supposed to make them afraid. The world is what it is. We will have trouble in the world. That is the thing. But Christ has overcome the world. And I just want them to see that is what artists are telling them, even when the artist himself doesn't know it, even when the artist himself does not mean to send that message. Art supplies so much beauty. It supplies so much beauty in the world. But if all you look at is kind of childish, everything is happy art, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss the experience of the beauty in art and also the beauty in this sometimes very dark world. And that's what I want people to come away with.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, breaking it all down. The book is Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. Thanks for joining me today.
Great to see you, Billy.